I am Dr. Rapp, and this is Appreciating Shakespeare, Series 2, Podcast F, Twelfth Night, or What You Will. Deep down, everyone knows the difference between authenticity and fakeness, though we can sometimes be fooled. And everyone who is not the victim of a corrupt soul or a corrupt culture prefers authenticity. In matters of emotion, authenticity is represented by the word sentiment, and fakeness by the word sentimentality. What is the difference? Sentiment is the emotion or feeling we have in response to an actual experience of a thought, an event, a person, a work of art. By contrast, sentimentality is the cultivation of an emotion or a feeling for the sake of the feeling itself. What you feel when the vet tells you that your dog has a terminal disease is sentiment, grief and sorrow if you love your dog, or perhaps relief if you don't. What you engage in when you intentionally seek out the image of a dying pet in order to have a good cry is sentimentality. An authentic work of art, say Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, evokes sentiment because what it says matters. A typical pornographic film is pure sentimentality. What it says doesn't matter at all. It exists only to arouse the viewer sexually. Meeting someone attractive, falling in love, and being refused may evoke the sentiment of melancholy. Fantasizing about an unattainable ideal beloved in order to wallow in melancholy on purpose, that is sentimentality. Twelfth Night tells the story of an entire society corrupted and immobilized by sentimentality. Nearly all its inhabitants are stuck in the cultivation of various fantasies of love in order to wallow in their own feelings. Orsino, young, rich, and eligible, enjoys lying around listening to music that makes him miserably hungry for love because his fantasy Olivia won't marry him. Olivia, young, rich, beautiful, and eligible, locks herself away from all men to spend her youth in sorrowing for her dead brother. Sir Toby Belch devotes his life to partying, avoiding any real relationship, trying to make every day of the year into Twelfth Night, nothing but revels. Malvolio is consumed by a fantasy image of rising above his proper station in life to boss people around after marrying his boss, a Twelfth Night fool wanting to be king. Sir Andrew Aguecheek foolishly wastes his money in pursuit of the fantasy of marrying Olivia. No one in Illyria is in touch with reality except Maria, Olivia's waiting gentlewoman, and the official court fool, Feste, who satirizes the real fools in wit and song. But neither the wit of Maria nor the commentary of Feste can cure the society of its disease of sentimentality. What does cure it is an invasion. 3 people from over the sea, who have lost everything and survived real suffering, providentially enter the scene, seeking refuge and a way to live. Their authenticity is so irresistible that the sentimentalists who meet them are compelled out of their fantasy lives into real love. For safety, Viola, whose name is an anagram of Olivia, disguises herself as a boy. There is a big difference between outward disguise adopted out of necessity and the inward inauthenticity of sentimentality. The relationship that develops between Viola and Orsino is a sharing of hearts and minds. As a result, Orsino comes to recognize that his true love is the inner Viola, not the outward pseudo-boy Cesario, and not the outward beauties of Olivia, whose inner life he has never taken the trouble to know. Olivia likewise falls for the inward Viola disguised in the outward form of a boy, and, lucky for her, Viola's character and that of her brother Sebastian, whose dress she copies, are equally virtuous and noble, so that fantasy yields to reality and happiness results. The title of the play is significant. Twelfth Night refers to the 12th night after Christmas, the Feast of Epiphany, meaning manifestation, celebrating the revealing of the Christ child to the Magi, related to our word magic. The Magi were Persian wise men or astrologers who, according to Matthew chapter 2, verse 2, came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him." The manifestation of the Christ child to them symbolizes the revelation of God to the world in the form of the Incarnation. The holiday was celebrated in England during Shakespeare's time with feasting, wassail, that is drinking hot mulled cider, and topsy-turvy antics and pranks, including treating the local fool as a king for the day. The title of the play, intended figuratively, thus implies that everything is upside down in Illyria until the manifestation of the truth of reality in Act 5. That comes in the form of the revelations that the boy Cesario is really the girl Viola, and that Sebastian is alive and present. These revelations resolve the mistakings of the plot and correct the confusion of hearts. The subtitle of the play, "What You Will," is also significant. For Shakespeare, the word will had at least 7 senses. 1. The primary meaning is the free will of man, our choice-making power, which was considered God's greatest gift to human beings and one quality by which we are distinguished from the animals. 2. From that sense of the word comes the form of the future tense of verbs. I will call home literally means I wish, intend, choose to call home. 3. Also from the primary sense comes the sense willfulness, that human impulse that sets our will against God's will, namely our self-indulgent desires and compulsions. 4. That sense, narrowed, led to the sense sexual desire or erotic compulsion. 5. And that sense led to will as a euphemism for the human genitalia, both male and female, as in Shakespeare's Sonnet 135. 6. The word also means, as for us, the document called a last will and testament. 7. Finally, in several of his sonnets, Shakespeare makes these various senses into puns on his own name, William. In the subtitle of Twelfth Night, it is senses 1 through 4 that are implied, and the play itself adds sense 6. So, what you will can mean what you use your free will to choose, whether for good or ill, what you choose to do in the future, what your willfulness seeks despite the impediments of morality or reality, your erotic or sexual desire, and your intentions about what you leave behind you at death. The combination of the title and subtitle works at 2 levels. At one level, the subtitle is a cliché title for a comedy, like the phrases "as you like it," or "all's well that ends well," or "much ado about nothing." The author is saying, call this play either Twelfth Night or whatever else you want to call it. At the deeper level, the title and subtitle together give us a choice between Twelfth Night, that is, the manifestation of the divine, and what you will, that is, our selfish, self-directed, sentimental choices. In other words, between reality and our own fruitlessly fanciful willfulness. The plot of the play, in fact, leads the characters from what they erroneously desire toward what reality intends for them for their own good, from what you will to Twelfth Night. The phrase "what you will" pops up during the play as well. Malvolio's name means bad will, and he embodies the most extreme example of self-will in the play, short of Orsino's threat to kill Viola Cesario in Act 5, Scene 1. Olivia utters at Act 1, Scene 5, lines 108 to 109, the exact form of the subtitle when she says, "If it be a suit from the Count, I am sick or not at home, what you will to dismiss it. In the same scene, at lines 153 to 154, Malvolio says, "He'll speak with you, will you or no?" A few lines later, Olivia says to Viola Cesario, "Your will?" At Act 2, Scene 4, line 117, Viola says to Orsino, "Our shows are more than will." In Act 2, Scene 5, at lines 161 to 179, Malvolio asserts his will 8 times in resolving to win the lady, from "I will be proud" to "I will do everything that thou wilt have me." At Act 3, Scene 3, line 11, Antonio claims, in a good sense, his willing love. And many of the normal uses of the future tense in the play should probably be construed as expressing not merely futurity or intention, but commitment of the force of the free will. The plot of the play slowly brings to a good resolution this contest between the revelation and celebration of love, implied in the phrase "Twelfth Night," and the willful sentimentality implied in the phrase "what you will," as one character after another is forced to confront reality in the form of the invaders, Viola, Sebastian, and Antonio. Orsino's sentimental love of being in love is driven out by his real and actual love of his disguised companion Viola. Olivia's sentimental pretense of love for her brother is driven out by her real and actual love of a real Viola disguised as an imaginary Cesario, and comes to fruition in the person of the imaginary boy's real and actual brother Sebastian. Sir Toby's self-indulgent partying is converted to the real celebration of marriage to Maria when his imaginary opponent gives him a real and actual knock on the head. Malvolio's sentimental fantasy of marrying Olivia and governing his betters is cured by the revelation that the supposed letter from Olivia too was a fantasy, and by his consequent treatment as a real madman. It is left to us to imagine whether Sir Andrew's own knock on the head and rebuff by his parasitical drinking companion can awaken him from his own foolish fantasy. As in the Epiphany that the Twelfth Night holiday celebrates, so in the play named for it, the banishment of the fruitless fantasy of self-will is accomplished through the unimaginable invasion of the healing reality of love. Now let's look at 5 key lines in the play. 1. At Act 1, Scene 5, lines 47 to 52, Feste says to Olivia, "Anything that's mended is but patched. Virtue that transgresses is but patched with sin, and sin that amends is but patched with virtue. As there is no true cuckold but calamity, so beauty's a flower." This speech articulates a central theme of the play. The first part asserts that human beings are not perfect. Since Adam and Eve were exiled from the Garden of Eden, men are born in sin, and any pretense they have to perfection is illusory. For the most part, their errors are not thoroughly evil, but are merely blots on their general virtue. Likewise, their virtues do not make them perfect, as only Jesus was believed to be, but patch up what inevitable original sin and latterly chosen sin have marred. People who cannot accept their patchedness will suffer consequences. Olivia believes she can mourn for her brother for 7 years without paying a price, but the price will be the loss of her youth and beauty, and therefore her hope for a happy life, the real threat being not only time and aging, but the kind of self-delusion that will make her unavailable and unacceptable to a loving man. The second part of Feste's speech applies the general principle to Olivia's condition, and full weight must be given to the word true. There is no true cuckold but calamity. Means that the only one whom it would be appropriate and valid to make into a cuckold, that is, to betray by loving another man, is calamity itself. The only one Olivia would make a cuckold of by loving a man who is not her dead brother is calamity. She ought not to be faithful to her foolishly prolonged sorrow, but should make a cuckold of the calamity of her brother's death by being willing to entertain an appropriate suit of love. Beauty's a flower means simply that one's desirability will not last forever. It is a mistake to pretend that youth, beauty, and eligibility should be sacrificed to excessive mourning. The idea is repeated in Festi's song, "What is love? 'Tis not hereafter," at Act 2, Scene 3, lines 47 to 52. In short, face facts and get over your sentimentality if you ever want to be happy. Viola affirms the principle at Act 1, Scene 5, lines 188 to 189 and lines 241 to 243. She says, "What is yours to bestow is not yours to reserve," and, "Lady, you are the cruelst she alive if you will lead these graces to the grave and leave the world no copy. You have been given youth, beauty, and wealth to use in bestowing them upon a loving husband and in reproduction, not to keep fruitlessly to yourself." Compare to the parable of the talents in Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 to 30, and to Shakespeare's sonnets 1 through 17. 2. Olivia, Viola, and Sebastian all three speak to themselves and to the audience words of acceptance. They come respectively at Act 1, Scene 5, lines 310 to 311, Act 2, Scene 2, lines 40 to 41, and Act 4, Scene 1, lines 60 to 65. The two girls, Olivia and Viola, recognizing that things beyond their control are happening to them, surrender control to the higher powers, which they call, respectively, fate and time, which we may call providence or the will of God. Olivia, under the compulsion of a real attraction to Viola Cesario, is moved out of her sentimental mourning to welcome the reality of love. "Fate, show thy force. Ourselves we do not owe," which here means own. "What is decreed must be, and be this so." That is, let this be so, may it be so. She turns her will toward the confirmation of her attraction by wishing her love for Cesario, and hypothetically his for her, to flourish. This decision will be rewarded because fate has decreed that she will be loved in return by the actual male version of Cesario, namely Sebastian. Viola is caught loving Orsino, who loves Olivia, who loves Viola as Cesario. This is the knot that she cannot herself untangle, and she knows it. "Time, thou must untangle this, not I. It is too hard a knot for me to untie." But whereas Olivia's surrender to fate was a transformation of her sentimental willfulness in the face of true sentiment, Viola's surrender to time reveals no change in her character, but an instance of her consistent hope and humility. For early in the play, at Act 1, Scene 2, lines 19 to 21 and line 60, in circumstances where her brother, like Olivia's, may be lost, she says, "Mine own escape unfoldeth to my hope the like of him," and "What else may hap, to time I will commit." Love and hope cause the wills of both girls rightly to make a cuckold of calamity. Sebastian, who arrives at Illyria with nothing but the friendship of Antonio, finds himself unaccountably loved by Olivia, who is ready to bestow on him not only herself, but her substantial estate. To this unexpected good fortune he too submits. "If it be thus to dream, still let me sleep." When Olivia asks him to be ruled by her, his reply is, "Madam, I will." He welcomes the gifts of fortune, now changed from disastrous to positive, as Olivia does her new fate, and as Viola does the working of time. 3. At Act 2, Scene 3, lines 114 to 116, Sir Toby Belch says to Malvolio, "Art any more than a steward? Dost thou think, because thou art virtuous, there shall be no more cakes and ale? Sir Toby's denunciation of Malvolio resonates through the play in ways he does not himself intend. We are all no more than stewards of what is given us, as Olivia may, in Viola's words quoted earlier, bestow her youth and beauty and wealth, but not reserve it. Orsino ought to be a better steward of Illyria, rather than wallowing in love melancholy. Sir Toby himself ought to quit wasting his life and Maria's happiness in partying every night. There will be cakes and ale despite Malvolio's pseudo-virtue, but the line works both ways. There will also be bumps on the head, as we hear in Act 5, Scene 1, lines 176 and 196, despite Sir Toby's cakes and ale. And there will be the passage of time, but also the invading possibility of real love, despite Olivia's and Orsino's respective self-indulgences. 4. At Act 5, Scene 1, lines 376 to 377, Feste says, "And thus the whirligig of time brings in his revenges." He means that there is justice in the universe. Compare this line with his comment at Act 2, Scene 4, lines 70 to 71. Pleasure will be paid one time or other, meaning self-indulgent pleasures will be paid for by suffering of some kind under the ultimate equity of justice. Revenges of time are to be distinguished from human vengeance, which is forbidden. Feste has noted that Malvolio has had his comeuppance. The humorous man Malvolio, I discussed the humors in the second session of Chapter 7 in Series 1, storms off saying, at Act 5, Scene 1, line 378, "I'll be revenged on the whole pack of you." But that threat does not end the play, for Orsino gives us hope for Malvolio by saying, 2 lines later, "Pursue him and entreat him to a peace." Orsino needs Malvolio to report on the captain, but he is also showing a degree of magnanimity appropriate to him now that he too has been brought to peace by time and love. We are invited to hope that Malvolio's will come around and permit him to benefit from the same whirligig of time that has punished him. Orsino's phrase, by the way, is echoed by, or echoes, the magnanimous prince in Hamlet at Act 2, Scene 2, lines 322 to 323, written at about the same time. The humorous man shall end his part in peace. 5. At Act 5, Scene 1, lines 389 to 408, Feste's final song sums up the lessons of the various characters in the play. A foolish thing was but a toy when one was young, but when one grows up to man's estate, there is no room for knaves and thieves. By swaggering could I never thrive in matters of love. Orsino, Olivia, Malvolio, and Sir Andrew Aguecheek have all demonstrated as much. As for Sir Toby, with tosspots still had drunken heads, meaning that the head of a literal drunk is itself still, meaning always, metaphorically drunk, that is, foolish, self-indulgent, and hence self-destructive. The rain it raineth every day implies that through the operation of justice by the whirligig of time, men are healed of their follies, by painful experience if necessary. The rain which falls upon the sentimental as the discipline of disappointment is in fact the rain of grace, always descending, always available, to which the proper response is humility and gratitude. And that is what the Feast of the Epiphany celebrates. Now, here are 20 specific notes to help you in your reading. This is where you will want to have your book open and a pencil in hand if you're interested in getting the details right. 1. In the second line of the play, Orsino says about music, "Give me excess of it." In a Shakespeare play, anyone looking for excess of anything is asking for correction. 2. Also in the first speech of the play, at lines 10 to 11, some editions print as 2 sentences what should be 1. The erroneous punctuation causes us to read, O Spirit of love, how quick and fresh art thou, that, notwithstanding thy capacity, receiveth as the sea, period. Naught enters there of what validity and pitch soe'er, but falls into abatement and low price even in a minute. The correct punctuation causes us to read, more pointedly, O Spirit of love, how quick and fresh art thou, that notwithstanding thy capacity receiveth as the sea, comma, naught enters there of what validity and pitch soe'er, but falls into abatement and low price even in a minute. That is, although the capacity of love to receive and be fed, as by music, is as great as that of the sea, nevertheless nothing enters there, however valuable, that is not soon reduced in value by comparison with love itself. Even in his first speech, Orsino is finding that excess leads to surfeit. 3. In that same first speech, Orsino is confusing the spirit of love in line 9 with fancy, our word fantasy, in line 14, another clue that his character is laboring in confusion and needs correcting. 4. In Act 1, Scene 2, line 15, the name Arion is pronounced Orion. As the note in the Riverside edition has it, Orion, a Greek poet and musician, on a voyage from Sicily to Greece, charmed dolphins with his singing and playing on the lyre. When he leaped overboard to escape murder by the sailors, he was saved by a dolphin on whose back he rowed to shore. He is not to be confused with the mythical Orion with an O, the great hunter of classical mythology, who became a constellation in the heavens. 5. At Act 1, Scene 4, lines 38 to 40, Orsino says, Prosper well in this, and thou shalt live as freely as thy Lord to call his fortunes thine. Meaning, if you prosper in this, your reward will be to name your price. In the lines we may hear a foreshadowing of Viola's future as his wife. The irony is that he is asking Viola, his true future wife, to achieve that status by winning Olivia to be his wife, a paradox only time can untangle. 6. At Act 1, Scene 5, lines 5 to 6, Feste says, He that is well hanged in this world needs to fear no colors. This is a pun. To fear no colors means literally not to fear the military flags of an enemy army, and figuratively not to fear anything. The pun is on collars, that is, A, the hangman's noose, and B, any controlling device, like a collar on a dog. Parallel versions of the commonplace are the end of life cancels all bands, meaning bonds, that's in Henry IV, Part 1, Act 3, Scene 2, line 157, and he that dies pays all debts, that's in The Tempest, Act 3, Scene 2, line 131. 7. The word talents in Act 1, Scene 5, line 15 is a reference to the parable of the talents in Matthew, chapter 25, verses 14 to 30. 8. In the phrase labeled to my will, at Act 1, Scene 5, lines 246 to 247, the sense of the word will here is last will and testament, and Olivia's irony recalls Feste's warning back in key line number 1, Beauty's a Flower, for there is no way for the elements of her beauty to be left to others when she dies. 9. At Act 2, Scene 1, lines 47 to 48, Antonio says, I do adore thee so, that danger shall seem sport, and I will go. Shakespeare, like his age and every age until the time of Freud, believed in the possibility of true friendship between males that was devoted, passionate, and loving, but not erotic or sexual. I'll discuss the question Was Shakespeare gay or not in Series 1, Chapter 11 on the sonnets. Antonio here is the opposite of Orsino, who believes he loves Olivia because of her physical beauty. Antonio's devotion to the noble and virtuous Sebastian drives him into danger and makes him willing to sacrifice his own safety for Sebastian's. At Act 3, Scene 4, lines 312 to 314, Antonio says, "If this young gentleman have done offence, I take the fault on me. If you offend him, I for him defy you." It is the apparent betrayal of this willing self-sacrifice that torments him when Sebastian, really Viola Cesario, seems to deny knowing him. 10. At Act 2, Scene 3, lines 82 to 83, Sir Andrew says, "He does it with a better grace, but I do it more natural." Theologically, it is grace that redeems nature. As a noun, the word natural meant a fool. Thus, Sir Andrew is unwittingly confessing to being a fool, from which condition he does not yet recognize any need to be redeemed. Whether he will recognize it after Sir Toby denounces him as an asshead and a coxcomb and a knave, a thin-faced knave, a gull, at Act 5, Scene 1, lines 206 to 207, Shakespeare leaves it to us to imagine. 11. At Act 2, Scene 4, lines 73 to 78, after he performs his melancholy love song to please the sentimental Orsino, Feste says, "Now the melancholy god protect thee, and the tailor make thy doublet of changeable taffeta, for thy mind is a very opal. I would have men of such constancy put to sea, that their business might be everything and their intent everywhere, for that's it that always makes a good voyage of nothing." Feste is subtly accusing Orsino of being inconstant and frivolous. Changeable taffeta, as the note in the Riverside edition has it, is thin silk woven of threads of different colors so that its color shifts with movement. Opal is a gem with iridescent colors, hence also changeable. Such constancy means constancy like yours, that is, inconstancy. Makes a good voyage of nothing implies A. Makes a voyage in pursuit of mere fantasy into something of use, meant ironically. B. Makes a voyage come to nothing, arriving nowhere, since the intent is to go everywhere, and bringing back no fruits. And C. Makes such a voyage good in that it is worthy of noting, that is, from it a lesson is to be learned. Nothing was pronounced noting in Shakespeare's time, as we saw in the discussion of Much Ado About Nothing, Series 2, Podcast D. 12. At Act 2, Scene 4, lines 85 to 86, Orsino says, "But 'tis that miracle and queen of gems that nature pranks her in," meaning adorns or decorates her, "that attracts my soul." That is, it is Olivia's physical body that attracts the fancy of Orsino. Hence, the superficiality and frivolity and inconstancy that Feste sees in him is confirmed. By contrast, it will be not Viola's outward form, but her character that will in fact cause Orsino to love her. As with Antonio's love of Sebastian, so here, directors who seek to appeal to their audiences with gender-bending interpretations in which Orsino almost but not quite kisses Viola Cesario, or, less often, Viola Cesario almost kisses Olivia, distract us from the point of those relationships. There is no support for such gestures in the text. Orsino is not moved by Cesario's feminine charms to kiss him. He mistakenly believes that those charms will be a useful tool for winning for him the love of Olivia, whom he loves only for her body. The point is that his relationship with Viola Cesario is developing in the realms of mind and heart, not body. Viola is of course attracted to Orsino, but sexually speaking, that is a one-way attraction until Orsino can see Viola in her woman's weeds, meaning her clothing. The phrase comes at Act 5, Scene 1, line 273. 13. At Act 2, Scene 5, line 60, Malvolio says, "Or play with some rich jewel." Malvolio was about to say, "Play with my chain," that is, the metal chain worn around his neck as the indication of his office as steward of Olivia's estate. He stops himself, realizing that in his fantasy he will no longer be a steward, and shifts his image to some rich jewel. There should be a dash after "play with my" in the text. 14. At Act 2, Scene 5, line 108, Fabian uses the phrase, "a fustian riddle." Fustian is a kind of rough cloth made of cotton and flax. As an adjective, it means high-flown, bombastic, pretentious, and also fake, made-up, nonsensical. We are not, like Malvolio, to treat the four letters MOAI as a code Shakespeare is using to convey a message to us. To do so is to become Malvolio ourselves. The message is just what Fabian says it is, a pretentious nonsense riddle in which it will be our pleasure to watch Malvolio try to find the meaning he wants. Maria has taken some of the letters of Malvolio's name to lead him on, and in his bloated vision of himself, he reaches just the conclusion she intends him to reach. 15. At Act 3, Scene 2, lines 14 to 15, Fabian says, "I will prove it legitimate, sir, upon the oaths of judgment and reason." Fabian is engaging in some sleight of hand to hoodwink Sir Andrew, based on the book of Jeremiah, chapter 4, verse 2, "And thou shalt swear, the Lord liveth, in truth, in judgment, and in righteousness." St. Thomas Aquinas articulates the conditions under which an oath is valid: judgment or discretion, truth, and justice. Fabian is leaving out truth because he is persuading Sir Andrew to believe a falsehood. And he is being ironical because Sir Andrew, being a fool, is blind to reason and judgment. In fact, he is engaging in argument, "I will prove it legitimate," rather than taking an oath. 16. At Act 4, Scene 2, line 2, Feste takes on the disguise and persona of Sir Topas the curate, in the attempt of Maria, Sir Toby, and Fabian to punish Malvolio by pretending that Malvolio has gone mad. The name Sir Topas probably comes either from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales or from John Lilly's Endymion, or both. In the Canterbury Tales, the character, Chaucer, begins a verse tale of a knight named Sir Topas, Thopas, who is in love with an elf queen and is determined to kill the giant protecting her. The tale is interrupted by the host, who is bored with its old-fashioned rhyming style. The story is almost certainly meant to be a parody of certain kinds of romances, and Shakespeare's point may be that Feste is likewise about to give a satirical performance made up of clichés, pseudo-scholarship, and madcap. It will also, like the tale of Sir Topas, be aborted. In Endymion, Sir Tophas, Tophas, is a braggart soldier fond of tautological rhetoric. There may also be a play on the gemstone topaz, Topaz, which was believed to cure insanity. 17. At Act 5, Scene 1, lines 20 to 21, after Feste has argued that he is the better for his foes, who "tell me plainly I am an ass," and the worse for his friends, who "praise me and make an ass of me, and by whom I am abused," he ends by saying, "So that, conclusions to be as kisses, if your 4 negatives make your 2 affirmatives, why then the worse for my friends and the better for my foes." In this last bit, Feste is engaging in chop logic to make a true point. A friend's flattery will harm, but his criticism helps. Where the kisses come in is not entirely clear. Sir Philip Sidney had played on grammar and kisses in Sonnet 63 of Astrophel and Stella. When Stella says, "No, no," Astrophel takes her to mean yes, because who can contradict the rules of grammar by which two negatives make an affirmative? In any case, the morality of Feste's argument is more important than its logic. One is made an ass of by being flattered. One who is told the truth is the better for it. Abused in line 20 means fooled, tricked, or lied to. 18. At Act 5, Scene 1, lines 164 to 167, Orsino asks, "What wilt thou be when time hath sowed a grizzle on thy case? Or will not else thy craft so quickly grow that thine own trip shall be thine overthrow?" Orsino is predicting awful things for the Cesario he believes has betrayed him. Compare with his prediction about Olivia at Act 1, Scene 1, lines 34 to 38. How will she love when the rich golden shaft, that is Cupid's arrow, hath killed the flock of all affections else that live in her, etc. 19. At Act 5, Scene 1, lines 200 to 201, Sir Toby says, of the doctor, "Then he's a rogue and a passy measures pavan." Feste is trying to teach Sir Toby his lesson by saying that the doctor Toby needs is drunk and unavailable, as Toby has been until now, and that Dick Surgeon's eyes had set like the sun, that is, closed already, by 8 in the morning, presumably because, like Toby earlier, he had been drinking all night. In Toby's insult, passy measures may refer to the Italian passamezzo, a dance tune whose sections, as the note in the Riverside edition tells us, are 8 bars each, hence suggested to Sir Toby by Feste's set at 8. The pavan, or pavan, was a slow and stately dance. Sir Toby is condemning the doctor for being so slow to come to his aid. 20. At Act 5, Scene 1, lines 374 to 377, Feste says, "But do you remember? Madam, why laugh you at such a barren rascal? And you smile not, he's gagged." He is quoting to Malvolio's own verbal attack against him at Act 1, Scene 5, lines 83 to 88. I am Dr. Rapp, and this is Appreciating Shakespeare.